Okay, we're going to have a look at the 2018 suspense account question, which is question 7 in your exam papers. This is our most recent suspense account question that we have to look at. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do the 5 corrections or adjustments and then journalize those to the right. In fact, you can already see I've done that work. And then I'm hopeful that the marking scheme will assist you in the rest of the question. I think the workings are the most difficult part in these questions. So we're going to start with the first one here. But before we do that, maybe we should just read the opening sentence. It says the trial balance of D. Fahy, who is a garage owner. Now that's relevant because we know that that means if he buys a car, it goes into purchases because it's probably a purchase for resale. It's part of the stock. It failed to agree at the end of the year 2017. The difference was entered in the suspense account and the following balance sheet was prepared. And there you see the suspense included in the creditor's figure. But then on the next page, it says, on checking the books, the following errors and omissions were discovered. An error being something which was recorded incorrectly, an omission being something which was not recorded at all, which was left out. I'm going to use the system that I've taught you in class about on the left-hand side what should have happened, then what actually happened, and then the correction required. And this will move us across to the general journal then to the right of your screens. So let's do the first one. It says a car lift purchased on credit for €4,000 has been entered on the incorrect side of the creditor's account. The only other entry made was a debit of 400 to the purchases account, which it shouldn't have been in at all. So therefore, we're going to show you here what should have happened. Now, if you have equipment that you buy, well, of course, that will increase the asset by 4,000. So your assets will go up there. And if you buy that on credit, well, then you have a new creditor of 4,000 to whom you owe money, hence he's a liability on the credit side. This is what should have happened. This is our happy situation. However, what actually happened is that it was recorded on the incorrect side of the creditor's account. And it was also the only other entry made was a debit of 400 in the purchases account. So therefore that 400 appears there on the debit side of the purchases account. Now, how do we rectify this situation? How do we make this situation look like this? What should have happened over here? Well, in equipment, we should have 4,000 on the debit side, so we enter it in. This creditor's number should be on the opposite side, so therefore to switch something across from side, you cannot just put in the 4,000 because that will just simply balance out this error. Instead, you need to double that. You need to put in 8,000 here. And the first 4,000, which is just balancing out the error, and the second 4,000, which is actually putting in what should have gone in the first place. And then we have our purchases, and of course we should not have had €400 purchases on the debit side here, so therefore we are going to just cancel that, not double that, but just eradicate it by putting 400 there on the credit side. That is our correction required. You transfer that correction up here into the general journal. You have a debit of 4,000, a credit of 8,000 in creditors, and a credit of 400 in purchases. That's just these three from the correction required column. And that will leave you with a suspense figure of 4,400. And that suspense figure of 4,400. How do you get this? This must, in this situation here, there must be a balancing of the two sides. The debit and the credit column must balance. So therefore 4,400 on the debit side is what is required to make this 8,4 on both sides, and therefore correct. I've just written down the word narrative here. You guys know that you need to put in a narrative there, something like correction of the error of the equipment purchased being recorded incorrectly. Something like that, one mark for each narrative, and you're basically summarizing the problem. And so therefore that's the first one done. We're going to move on to number 2. Now, number 2, move it up fractionally here. Number 2, again, you can see that it has been done here in the General Journal, but I'm going to show you the origin of those numbers. So let's read the question and see what it says. It says, D. Fahy's private car, valued at €10,000, was presented to the business for resale. Now, no entry was made in the books in regard to this transaction. The car was later sold on credit to a debtor for $10,000. This sale has been treated as a cash sale. So there's 2 distinct errors here. The first one where something was omitted, the second one where something was recorded incorrectly. So with the first one, if Mr. Fahy puts his private car into the business, well, then that is an introduction of capital. And that 10,000 should have went there. And he put the car into the business with the intention of it being resold. So therefore, it's going to go into the purchases account along with the 20 or 30 other cars that are in his forecourt. So that's that first bit done. That's what should have happened. And then, of course, subsequently, this car was sold to a debtor. So therefore, the sales, you're going to take this car out, sold for 10,000, and you're going to say, well, now there is a debtor who owes us 10,000. Because they have bought that car off us. So therefore, this is the second half of that. And that quite simply is what should have happened. This introduction of capital, a privately owned car put into the business, and then that car being sold to a debtor. Now, what actually happened is, well, nothing happened as regards the capital or the purchases. This was omitted. And instead, what happened here was it was recorded as a sale, all right, but it was recorded as a cash sale. So instead of the debtors owing us money, we've recorded down here that we have actually received that 10,000 already, which is a very different thing, obviously, because we won't be looking for it in the future if we think we have received it, when in fact we are still owed that 10,000 by the debtor. So what is the correction that is required? Well, capital and purchases have nothing in there. It's an error of omission. So we need to put in what is correct. So therefore, capital, let us record this 10,000 here, and the purchases, let us record this purchases here. That has solved that. Now, the sales has been recorded correctly. So that is not something that we need to fix. This is what should have happened. This is what actually happened. Sales is okay here. But what we do need to do is we need to solve this situation with cash and debtors. In fact, what we need to do is we need to take out €10,000 out of the cash, or perhaps the bank account, because there may not be that much in the cash account. Well, there's 12,200 actually. And we need to put that back into debtors because that is money that we are owed. This should be here, and it was not. So therefore, it is now. So therefore, we cancel that amount of cash and we put it into debtors instead. We transfer all of this to the General Journal, and here you have a credit on capital, extra capital of 10,000, extra purchases of 10. Debtors go up by 10 and cash goes down by 10. And you have a narrative which will say that the error of omission for the initial injection of capital, and then a credit sale being recorded as a cash sale. 1 mark for the narrative. That's number 2 completed. No need for a suspense account here because it's 20,000 on both sides. We're going to look at number 3. Number 3 is an old familiar one. It is in literally every question. It's about the purchase returns. So let's read down through it. It says D. Fahy had returned a motor car previously purchased on credit from a supplier for 12,000, but he had entered this transaction in the relevant ledger accounts as 1,200. Now I'm going to pause at that first full stop there, and I'm just going to do that first bit. So this is a motor car that we bought, but we are returning it. So a purchase return, it should go here, 12,000, and it should go here. That is reducing your purchases and reducing your creditors. He did do that, but he did it as 1,200. So this is what actually happened. 1,200. That's error number one, which we could solve now, but there's another error which we need to look at first. A credit note subsequently arrived from the supplier, showing a restocking charge of 200 to cover the cost of the return. So in fact, we did not get this much of a refund, 12,000. We didn't get that. They charged us a restocking charge of 200. So in fact, we only are reducing our purchases by 11,800, and we're only reducing what we owe here by 11,800. So 200 we're taking off that original position there because of the restocking charge. Now that is not what Mr. Fahy did. Instead, the last sentence of the error, it says the only entry made in respect of this credit note was a credit entry of 11,800 in the creditor's account, which of course was completely incorrect. But that's following the instruction of the question, 11,800. Now, once we have both errors done, the initial one, which was the 1,200 here, then we had to change this from 12,000 down to 200, but of course he didn't do that. He just put the 1118 on the credit side of creditors. Once we have both of these done, then we can go over and offer our solution. How do we make a credit of 11.8? Sorry, excuse me. How do we make a credit of 1,200 become a credit of 11,800? Well, we need to put something extra with this 1,200. We need to put a credit there of 10,600, which would be enough to bring the 12 up to 11,800. And then with creditors, well, here this is a little bit more tricky. We have to look at this account first, and we have to say to ourselves, what is currently in that account? Well, I think, I'm just going to write it in here for a moment. I think if you were to balance that, you would see that that is 10,600 in there. But we wish to have 11.8 on the opposite side. So in order to do that, we need to put quite a significant weight on the debit side here. We need to put a full 10.6 here to cancel or balance the account completely. And then we need to put 11.8 because that's what we want it to be. And the combination of these two numbers together is what we require over here, which is 22,400. That is enough to make the creditor's account look like we wish it to here. You bring both of these numbers into your general journal, and you will end up with having a suspense account of 11,800 on the credit side. That's what's required there. 11,800. Your narrative is required again there, and of course the narrative we've seen before. The narrative will be correction of the double entry error with regard to the purchase return, something along those lines. Let's look at number 4. Number 4 is a bad debt recovered situation. Let's read what the question says. It says a payment of 500 was received from F. McFadden, who is a debtor, and whose debt had previously been written off and who now wishes to trade again. So this is somebody who we had written off as a bad debt. He'd gone bankrupt. He has come back to us and said, I wish to trade again. This is 80% of the original debt, and the debtor has undertaken to pay the remainder of this debt by January 2018. No entry at all made in the book. This is a positive news story for this company. Somebody who he thought was a full bad debt actually is coming back to trade again. If €500 is 80%, of the debt, well, then the full debt is 100%, which is 625. That goes in on the credit side because that is an income. Bad debt recovered as an income. Of that, we have received in the bank 500, and he is promising to pay us the remaining 125, and he says he'll pay that in January of next year. So this is what should have happened. 625 of an income, debit in the bank of 500, debit and debtors of 125. What actually happened is that nothing happened. It's an error of omission, which is always quite nice to deal with, because what you have to do over here, what is the correction required? The correction required is just to simply replicate what we have here. So you're going to just bring this across. So therefore this is 65, 500, and 125. And you move this in here, and an error of omission will not require a suspense account, because you can see we have 625 on both sides there. And the narrative there is a correction of bad debt recovered, not recorded in the accounts. And then we're on to the fifth and final error. The fifth and final error, it speaks about purchasing goods, but there is a little bit of VAT in here as well. So what it says is D. Fahy purchased goods on credit from Car Parts Limited for €3,000 plus VAT at 13.5%. The only entries made in respect of this in the accounts were the VAT inclusive figure in equipment, which is entirely wrong, and the VAT exclusive figure put on the credit side of the car parts account, which we'll have a look at in a moment. But first off, let's talk about what should have happened. Well, if it's a purchase, it should have been on the debit side. That's an expense, and that's €3,000. From second year, we know, and also from the VAT account that I've given you as a revision to, we know that the VAT always goes on the debit side as well if it's a purchase VAT. So therefore, that's €405, 13.5% of here. And therefore, the creditors, well, that creditor there, we actually owe that guy 3,405. That's the bill for the car parts that we need to pay, of which 3,000 is purchases and 405 is VAT. Now, however, what actually happened? This is the situation we want to get to. But what actually happened? Well, let's go back to the question. It says the only entry in the accounts was the VAT inclusive figure on the debit side of equipment. Well, that is 3,405. That is the figure that's including VAT. And the VAT exclusive figure entered on the credit side of Car Parts Limited. Now, Car Parts Limited is the creditor. So the VAT exclusive figure without VAT is 3,000, and that was entered there. So therefore, this is the only recording we have. This is what it should be. Let's go over and do the correction. Well, purchases needs 3,000. We can see that it doesn't have it. It should have it. We're going to put it in there. VAT needs 405. Creditors. Well, creditors, this is on the correct side, but it's just not enough. It needs the extra 405, the extra VAT amount. And then equipment. Well, there should be nothing in equipment, but there currently is a debit of 3,405. We need to cancel that back to zero. So we put 3,405 on the credit side to cancel that debit, and that is making that zero. You transfer those four corrections in here, and you'll find that you'll be left with a suspense of 405 on the debit side. That's the balancing figure that's required. You write in your narrative, whatever it may be, and then you are finished part A, which is the journalizing of the corrections. There's 54 marks out of 100 for that. What you need to do now for part B, C, and D is go back and use each individual number in the general journal in the correct places. And you can follow the answer in the marking scheme, and hopefully that will work for you.